African History Organization of Dahomey FON AGAJA Kingdom, Dahomey FON/AGAJA Kingdom. Its origin is traced from the reign of Agbaja. The kingdom was founded out of conquest of several small Aja-speaking states under Aladaksonyu dynasty. It was located in the poorest areas of West Africa coast. It reached peak of its power between 1880–1858 with its capital at Dahomey. Prominent leaders of Dahomey included Agbaja 1650–1680, Gaja 1708–1740, Tukbesi 1740–89, Jizo 1880–1858, Glio 1859–1889, and Baanzan 1889–1894. It was one of the most powerful colonial societies in West Africa. Her power was based on political, social, and economic organization. This assisted her to resist the French colonial invasion until 1897 when she was defeated. It is said that Aja mobilized various tribes in the region into centralized leadership. Political organization. Dahomey had a centralized system of political organization with the king at the top. The king had excessive powers where he could appoint, promote, or demote his officials. He was assisted by a cabinet of ministers responsible for specific duties, and these included Mekin, who was a prime minister/king spokesman, Mingi as chief of the army and also chief magistrate and superintendent of police. Midu, minister of finance who collected revenue, Yevokin, minister in charge of overseas trade and European affairs, Tok, minister in charge of agriculture. The kingdom had a spying system traditionally known as Ne. The king appointed a female counterpart to each minister to monitor the activities of the officials. They were believed to be king's wives, though some of them were not. The most imperative in a state of Quedanshi ensured that she repeated all commercial activities carried out in the region of the king. The kingdom had a well-organized, well-trained, disciplined, and skilled army responsible for the expansion of the kingdom, raiding, defense against external aggression, and for suppression of rebellions. It was composed of both men and women. Women soldiers were known as the Amazon. These were brave women and the most unique in the whole of West African societies. Commanders in the army often held high posts in order to ensure their loyalty to the king. Mekin was the army commander of Dahomey armed forces, while Mu was also the commander of a big section in the army. The king was the overall commander-in-chief of the army. She had a proper political setup. The ascendancy system was hereditary in nature. This was meant to minimize succession disputes and civil wars that could result into anarchy and political instability. The successor to the king was always selected from the legitimate sons born to the king by his first wife while in office. This helped to eliminate unnecessary competition amongst many sons and distant relatives to the throne. It was an absolute monarchy. The king was the law. They enjoyed the prerogative power of the king, who held the law in his hands. He forbade the formation of secret societies, and whoever was found mercilessly punished. Sometimes he had to act within the law to ensure law in order to ensure democracy in the kingdom. The highest court of justice was called Mingi. They did not have an established set of rules except traditional customs and norms of the people that assisted in solving most of the problems that would emerge out of indiscipline by Dahomey natives. Through the policy of Dahomization, all conquered subjects were totally changed and absorbed into African History Organization of Dahomey FON AGAJA Kingdom. They had a centralized judicial system. There was a royal court of appeal at the king's palace presided over by Mingi, where several punishments were given. The kings could reduce or abolish sentences if he wished. The king's word was law, but he was not above the law. For example, King Glio was fined for breaking the law. Economic organization. Dahomey had an organized and outstanding economy which kept her strong and self-sustaining for quite a long period of time. Agriculture was the main revenue-generating activity, and the Minister of Agriculture was Tok. They carried out livestock, and a census was done. Village chiefs reported the number of animals slaughtered, and skulls were kept to make periodic checks to ensure food self-sustenance in the kingdom and for proper assessment of taxes. Animals kept included goats, sheep, cattle, pigs for food and trade purposes. The government also set up granaries where the surplus could be stored to avoid famine in the future. Indiscriminate killing of domestic animals was also prohibited by government to ensure the maintenance of large stocks of animals. Black pepper, ginger was only produced by the royal family. There was regional specialization in agriculture, like the Oja produced maize only, Samanda produced millet, ground nuts and maize. Agriculture was also revolutionized by introduction of palm oil plantations, which became the main source of income. The king instructed the whole population to get involved in the exercise of palm oil plantation. Trade was an economic activity in the kingdom. Slave trade was the major source of tax revenue to the kingdom before it was abolished. When it was abolished, Dahomey shifted to palm oil plantations/trade. Taxes and tributes from vassal states like Yoruba, Ife among others also formed basis for the kingdom's revenue. The state collected many taxes like custom duty, transit tolls, death duty. Income tax from different personalities was charged depending on the citizen's rank. taxation system had considered livestock and crops one had as important yardsticks to explain how much tax one would pay in the government. The kingdom rated her neighbours for slaves whom she sold to traders at the coast. The kingdom had basket weavers and craftsmen who produced several handcraft materials for sale. Mining, especially of salt, was done, and Yevogan collected 1 pebble of salt for every bag of salt mined. Small-scale industries such as cotton wearing, iron smelting. Blacksmith made war weapons such as spears, bows, arrows, etc. Social organization. The king was viewed as a symbol of royal dynasty. All the past kings and ancestors were highly honored, and Dahomeyans believed that they still had a say in their day-to-day affairs. Dahomey had a complexity of religious beliefs in gods and often offered sacrifices of human beings to the gods for blessings. The king had the powers to license the chief priests. Once one conquered an area, cultural customs and religious beliefs were either absorbed into Dahomey, one/simplified identified with those in existence. They had the annual festival of Dahomeyization, where all new members who wished to become full citizens dipped their fingers in the calabash of blood/water. The calabash was seen as a symbol of unity. Then they would dance around. They included the Yoruba Europeans. Dahomey existed in stratified social organization. It consisted of the leisured class, the commoners, and servile class. The leisured class consisted of the king's relatives and descendants of the past/present who were fewer. African history organization of Dahomey FON AGAJA kingdom. The servile class was slaves and serfs who came from foreign origins, since it was a crime to enslave a free-born Dahomeyan. The majority of the population belonged to this class. The commoners were allowed to marry from the royal class as long as they were economically capable. This made it possible for the children of commoners to get promoted in high ranks in government. Annual ceremonies to mark the existence of the kingdom, and during these, ancestors were honored, members were entertained. The king stressed concept of a perforated calabash filled with water where each citizen dipped a finger in such a hole as sign of allegiance to national spirits. Decline of Dahomey kingdom. Like other 19th century African states, Dahomey disintegrated. In 1892, the French forces took its leader by hands and a captive and exiled him to West Indies, setting the last blow to the kingdom. Large extent size. The abolition of slave trade. Succession disputes, like Jizo killed Adandasan to assume power, and also after Gliel's reign when he poisoned himself. Death of Jizo and Gliel. Influence of Nehru at times misinformed the king about activities of government officials. Natural calamities like drought and famine. Seizure of Port Novo by the French in 1883, which interrupted the state's trade. Repressive policies of kings like overtaxation. Arms embargo, a policy by which all Europeans vowed never to supply guns to African societies.